All right, bio, it's Wednesday and you have this video and one more and we will be done with notes and slides for the year. So I know that you probably are just as amped up as I am to be wrapping things up. So we are going to continue today, and now we are talking about class chondrichthyes. So say that 10 times fast. It's quite a mouthful. But this is the class that contains the cartilaginous fish, such as sharks, rays, and skates. So if you're one of those people that likes Shark Week on TV every year, then this information is for you. And I'm kind of bummed. I did have a couple cool like shark videos and documentaries and stuff that we were gonna do, and we're not gonna do them now. So thus is life with the corona. But anyways, moving on. So members of this class, like the sharks and the rays and such, they have an endoskeleton that is made of cartilage and is not calcified. So remember, these have a more flexible endoskeleton because it's not bone that has been hardened or calcified. And they have a very elaborate endoskeleton, including a jaw. So we talked about the lamprey eel before, which was a jawless fish. These guys do have jaws, as you know, hence the movie name, Jaws. Donna, Donna. Okay, I'm done. All right, so talking about sharks first, and then we'll talk about rays and skates after. But sharks are very deadly predators, as you guys know, with a sleek torpedo shape to their body, which allows them to move easily through the water and very quickly through the water. Their skin is actually covered with tiny scales, making it very rough, although to the untrained eye, it doesn't really look like that from a distance, but they have a very rough, scaly skin. And they also have several fins, including 6 basic types of fins. So the first one is the pectoral fin, which is near the head, and that's used most for swimming. They have the caudal fin, which is the end of the tail, also used mostly for swimming. They have an anterior dorsal fin, which helps to stabilize the shark and keep it upright, as well as a posterior dorsal fin, which also does the same thing. They have an anal fin, which also stabilizes the shark, and finally a pelvic fin in males, which plays a role in reproduction. Okay, and we talked about those anatomical terms of anterior and posterior and what dorsal means. Remember, like dolphins have a dorsal fin, so these are fins that are on the top of the body, and they have an anterior and a posterior, so a front and a back version of these. Okay, and so here are just some pictures of members of class I can't even say it, chondrichthyes. So we have the blue shark, we have a Caribbean shark, you've got rays and skates. Okay, and so here are the major external features that you can see of a shark: a nostril, eye, has gill slits for breathing, the pectoral fins, the anterior dorsal fin, the posterior dorsal fin, the caudal fin, anal fin, and the 2 pelvic fins. Okay, so pectoral and the pelvic fins are on both sides of the shark. All right. And so, continuing on, the mouth of a shark is lined with many rows of razor-sharp teeth, and these teeth are usually calcified, making them very, very strong. However, if a tooth is lost, the tooth in the row further back from it actually advances forward, and basically it's a backup tooth, or a backup row of teeth. And we know that you probably have heard that sharks lose quite a bit of teeth. People go on beaches like looking for shark teeth because you can find them, and that's because they're constantly losing them and getting replenished. Like many other aquatic animals or organisms, the sharks breathe through gills that are rich in capillaries, and so as the shark swims through the water, water, which has nutrients and oxygen in it, passes through those gills, and carbon dioxide gets filtered out as waste into the water, and they take in the new oxygen and nutrients. So although we don't breathe through gills, it's a similar concept of oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. They have eyes that have receptors on them, but they're not very keen with eyesight. That's not their main tool for predation. The receptors connect to the olfactory lobes, give them keen sense of smell, which is what they mostly rely on. The smell of blood as we know, sends sharks into a feeding frenzy. And so naturally in their brains, the olfactory lobes are going to be the more developed lobes of the brain because that's what they rely on most to consume their prey. All right, and so despite some eyesight and also the keen sense of smell, it's still not enough to provide the shark with enough range to hunt the prey that it needs. So it carries it a long way, but again, it's not enough. And so sharks were designed by God to have two highly developed means for searching prey. The first being a vibration detector, and the second being an electrical field sensor. So this is a fact that a lot of people don't actually know about sharks. Maybe you did, maybe you don't. But this vibration detector consists of a lateral line, which is a canal that runs the length of the shark's body, and it's full with receptors that can detect small vibrations in the water. So those vibrations that are produced by the prey that are living around and in the area around. It has the electrical field sensor, which is a three-dimensional field sensor that picks up on weak electrical signals from other animals. And so as all animals actually have some type of electrical signal and electrical current through them, including us. And so this electrical field sensor allows it to pick up on these electrical signals, and it can filter out signals from prey that it's interested in versus prey that it's not interested in, based off of these electrical signals and the vibration detector. And so this allows the shark to determine the precise location of the prey based off these two things. And so it can attack even without being able to see or smell the prey, simply from these vibrations and these electrical signals that it's getting. So it's a pretty cool system. And for a long time, scientists could not figure out how sharks did it. It took a long time for scientists to detect and to learn about these two systems that sharks have, because they're pretty incredible. They're very spot on. All right. Reproduction in sharks is through internal fertilization. Males will transfer sperm with a clasper, which is a specifically designed portion of that male pelvic fin that we saw in that picture and we talked about as one of the types of fins. Most sharks are oviparous, and so they release their fertilized eggs in a capsule that attaches to some type of stationary object underwater. And sharks have like many organisms, especially aquatic organisms, have a symbiotic relationship between a remora, which is a type of little fish, basically. And so the remora is a fish that attaches to the body of the shark all over with a little sucker organ, and it feeds on scraps that the shark loses as it feeds. And so that benefits the remora. But at the same time, it's symbiotic because it will eat parasites that are on the shark's body. And so it benefits the shark by removing the parasites, but benefits the remora by getting food scraps and waste from the shark. So it has a symbiotic relationship. Remember, we studied the symbiotic relationship between the sea anemone and the clownfish, and there are many, many other examples in nature of organisms that work together to benefit each other. All right, and, I had to be corny, so here it is. Just a little joke. Ben, I know I'm a good white shark, but I don't feel great. You're a great white shark, Kevin. Thanks, dude. I just needed to hear that today. All right, I'm done. I promise. Back to the notes. All right. So now, switching from just talking about rays and skates, let's talk a little bit more about, just talked about sharks. Let's talk a little bit more about rays and skates. So rays and skates, unlike the torpedo-shaped large bodies of the sharks, have more flat and thin bodies, and they're often referred to as the birds of the sea. They have large pectoral fins that act like large wings that propel them through the water. And you've seen rays before, so you know what we're talking about, the big wide span of wings. Their tails work like rudders, which help them to direct where they're swimming. And they're designed to lie at the bottom of the ocean. So their eyes are located on the top of their head so they can seek out danger as it swims above them, but they lie flat on the ground. They have really blunt teeth that are ideal for crushing shells of things like mollusks and the exoskeleton of different crustaceans. And some can even change color to blend in with the sand, which is obviously a defense mechanism to, help camouflage them from being eaten. And so the difference, though, is that rays have tender whip-like tails, while skates have very fleshy, thicker tails. And so in looking at pictures of both, you can determine if it's a ray or a skate by looking at how its tail is shaped. And stingrays, in particular, have sharp spines that run along their tails, which can lash out to a potential predator. So there are rays that are not stingrays, but those that are will have those sharp spines. All right, and so we're going to do a quick fact check over what we just covered before we continue on. All right, so if you cut the anterior and posterior dorsal fins from a shark, what will happen when it tries to swim? The shark will not be able to stay upright if you remove the anterior and posterior dorsal fins, because those help stabilize the shark and keep it upright. So it will flip and be on its side, and it wouldn't be able to swim properly. Number 2, some shark photographers will throw their camera batteries into the ocean when they are dead. This is obviously not good, one, because it pollutes the ocean, but they have noticed that sharks will go after these batteries as if they were prey. Why might that be? Well, they might be mistaking the electrical signal from the battery as a prey because of their electrical signaling and vibration detection. So definitely not a good habit to be in. Number 3, you see something flat on the ocean floor. It has a large pectoral fin, and it looks like it has wings and a very thin tail. Is it most likely a skate, or is it most likely a ray? It would most likely be a ray, because skates have thick, fleshy tails, and this is a thin tail. So we would assume that it is a ray. All right. Moving on to the next class, which is pronounced Astachythes. Okay, and I had to write that one down, how to pronounce it, because these names are not for the faint of heart. But this class is the class of bony fish, or honestly what most of us think of when we're thinking of a fish, a typical standard fish. And they have calcified endoskeleton, so they have true bones, at least in most regions of their body. So these are not cartilaginous, these are true bones, which is why if you've ever ate certain bony fish, you have to remove the bones. Sometimes they're really thin, and you got to be careful you don't choke. I can't stand eating fish that has bones in it. I hate tiptoeing around the fish meat to try and not choke on a bone, because sometimes there's a lot of them. So that is what we're talking about here. And all of these bony fish have calcified vertebral columns and skulls, as well as ribs and pectoral and pelvic girdles that are partially cartilaginous. And so like a shark, the bony fish also have 5 fins. They have an anterior and posterior dorsal fin, a caudal fin, a pelvic fin, and a pectoral fin. They also possess, similar to the sharks, the lateral line for vibration detection in water. And it's used by these bony fish to warn them of possible predators. So while sharks swim towards the vibrations, because that means there's prey that they can consume, bony fish swim away from the vibrations, because that means that there's something that's probably trying to eat it. So similar system, not quite as complex as the shark, but used in a completely different way as a mechanism to run away versus to hunt. Okay, and so if we look here, there's a picture. This is just what we're talking about, again, to highlight the different fins. A standard fish, what most people think of when we think of a bony fish. Okay, just a couple more slides here. Bony fish have what is called an opercula, which covers their gills. And so to breathe, fish open their mouth, taking in water and closing it. And the opercula opens and forces water to run out of the body. And as it moves from mouth to opercula, it passes over the gills. Okay, so we know that fish have gills. And oxygen that is dissolved in the water will diffuse into the capillaries of these gills, giving the fish the oxygen that it needs. And at the same time, carbon dioxide is diffused out into the water as waste product. All right? And so the bodies of these fish are much flatter than a shark, and so they need help balancing. And so they contain large dorsal fins in proportion to its body that have sharp spines, and this acts as a defense mechanism to the predator. And the body also consists of overlapping scales, which we know, most people know that fish are scaly, and they contain specialized glands beneath the scales that secrete mucus, which is what gives fish those slimy feels. So if you've ever gone fishing and then grabbed the fish off the line, you can feel the scales. They're rough and sharp in some cases, and also like slimy and gross, basically. And so this mucus is produced as a waterproofing agent and as a protection from parasites, and it also helps with mobility in the water and gliding smoothly through the water. Some studies indicate that this slime or this mucus that's produced reduces the drag and allows the fish to swim much faster. Okay, and so now we're going to start taking a look today and in the last video of the internal structures, including the circulatory system of typical bony fish. So you can see here, this is also from your book, but just some of the features that we find in a bony fish. All right, so internal anatomy first. When feeding, food will travel through the mouth and across the tongue, and that particular tongue, like us, is lined with taste buds, which have receptors that send signals to the brain to provide a sense of taste. So much like us, they have a sense of taste. Food will then pass through the muscular pharynx and into the esophagus, which leads to the stomach for digestion. So again, also very similar to humans' digestive tract layout at this point. However, fish have two main organs that aid the intestine in digestion. They have a pyloric ceca, or ceca, which secretes digestive enzymes, and they also have a liver, like we do, which secretes bile. What is bile? Well, bile is a mixture of salts and phospholipids that aid in the breakdown of fat. We too, as humans, produce bile. It is made in our liver and stored in our gallbladder and is used to aid in fat digestion. It's necessary. And so when food is not flowing through the intestines, the bile is shut off and is concentrated in the gallbladder, like ours is, for storage until the next meal arrives. All right, and just an important note, I've just drawn a lot of kind of points where we as humans share some of these same things. So although we're talking about the bony fish here, and that may seem strange, but the bony fish actually shares a lot of characteristics with many organisms, and so many of the vertebrates can have all of these different features. And so there's obviously variations between organisms, but it's important to note that although we're talking about a fish here, much of it applies to many other organisms, including ourselves. All right, so the liver in the bony fish, as well as other organisms, aids in storage. And it also converts glucose into the storage form of glucose into glycogen, which is how we, as humans, store glucose in our muscles. And it also plays a role in converting nutrients from one form to another. So the liver is a very multitasking organ. It combines nutrients into more useful chemicals for use by the body, so it converts the food we eat into things that our body needs to build and repair, etc., and it's no different for the fish. It also cleans the blood by converting toxins into safer forms, so it's a very efficient recycler. And many of the toxic substances that are removed by the liver then get integrated into the bile that the liver produces, and then ultimately that bile will be excreted in the feces of the organism, or in this case, the fish. A feature that many bony fish have that we do not have per se is called an air bladder. And this helps them to stay afloat. So without the air bladder, the fish would actually sink. But it basically, gases from digestion and blood diffusion and the blood diffuse into this little air bladder. So it's kind of like a little balloon, if you will, that allows it to stay afloat. And so if a fish wants to rise up in the shallow, into like a shallower depth of water, it can actually increase the gases in its air bladder so that more gas, it'll rise like a balloon. And then if it wants to go lower, it can actually lower the amount of gas so it goes deeper into the water. So obviously we don't have one of those, but that's a pretty cool feature. All right, and last slide for today. Talking about the brain of bony fish, they have olfactory lobes as well, which are generally pretty large, which gives them a keen sense of smell. And that's the main way that they seek out their prey. And they also have optic lobes, which generally give them pretty decent eyesight. And so their sense of smell is more critical than their sight, but they still have a decent amount of eyesight, and it increases the they have to rely on their sense of smell more because as they increase in depth in the ocean, there's less visibility as there's less light. So they rely more on their sense of smell in that case. But they do have a decent sense of sight. In reproduction, the sexes are separate for bony fish, much like they are for the rest of vertebrates. And most bony fish, are oviparous. So their females lay eggs and cover it with what's called milt, which is a milky white substance that contains the sperm. And fertilization is external in most bony fish. And when the female lays her eggs, it is called spawning. So you may have heard of fish spawning. All right, and so that's where we're going to end today, and we will finish out this information on Friday for your last video lesson.